Blue lights flashed across my backyard as 3 police cruisers pulled up outside my fence. My guests fell silent, their expressions shifting from celebration to concern. Across the fence, Karen stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant smile spreading across her face as the officers approached. She had been watching our modest gathering all evening, documenting every laugh, every clink of glasses with her phone camera like evidence at a crime scene. "I told you they were violating noise ordinances," she declared loudly to the approaching officers. "And I have reason to believe there are other violations happening as well." My heart sank as our anniversary celebration ground to a halt. One by one, our friends averted their eyes, embarrassment hanging in the air between us. This was supposed to be a special night for my wife after her exhausting work week. The lead officer looked down at his notes, then back up at me with a professional expression. Then his eyes shifted past my shoulder, and his entire demeanor changed. That was when I realized he recognized my wife, and Karen had made a catastrophic miscalculation. It had been 3 months since my wife and I had found the time to host friends at our modest suburban home. Between her demanding schedule training police recruits and my own work deadlines, quality time had become a luxury we rarely enjoyed. But our 5th anniversary deserved celebration, and I had spent weeks planning the perfect backyard gathering. The evening was warm but not uncomfortable as I strung fairy lights across our patio. The forecast promised clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect conditions for an outdoor party. I arranged the furniture to create conversation areas and set up the portable speaker system at a reasonable volume. Everything was measured and considered, from the placement of the grill away from property lines to the parking instructions I had sent to guests. My wife Sarah arrived home from her final training session of the week looking exhausted but pleased. She worked as a senior training officer for the Regional Police Academy, though she rarely discussed the details of her job at home. I knew she trained officers in everything from de-escalation techniques to community relations, but she preferred to leave work at work. Tonight was about celebrating us, not discussing law enforcement protocols. "It looks beautiful," she said, surveying my handiwork in the backyard. The fairy lights reflected in her eyes as she leaned in to kiss me. "Thank you for putting this together. I needed something normal after this week." As I carried out the appetizer trays, I noticed movement behind the curtains of the house, directly behind ours. Karen Williams had lived there for 15 years according to our other neighbors. She had established herself as the self-appointed neighborhood monitor long before we purchased our home 2 years ago. I had hoped our party would fly beneath her radar, but the slight parting of her curtains suggested otherwise. "Do you think she will cause problems?" Sarah asked, following my gaze to the window where Karen stood watching. I shrugged, trying to remain optimistic. "We have kept everything within regulations. The noise permit allows us until 11, and I have asked everyone to park legally. There is nothing she can complain about." Our first guests arrived at 6 o'clock precisely. College friends, work colleagues, and a few neighbors we had grown close to filtered into our yard, bearing gifts and warm wishes for our anniversary. Glasses clinked, conversation flowed, and for a while I forgot about the watchful eyes from the house behind us. The celebration was in full swing when my phone buzzed with a text from our neighbor Tom. "Heads up, Karen was just asking me if your party had proper permits. Might want to prepare for a visit." My stomach tightened, but I responded with thanks and pocketed my phone without sharing the warning with Sarah. Tonight was for celebration, not neighborhood politics. As the evening progressed, I continued to catch glimpses of Karen watching from various windows of her home. Each time our guests laughed particularly loudly or music transitioned to a new song, her silhouette would appear, sometimes with what looked like a phone held up to the glass. The knowledge of being monitored cast a small shadow over my enjoyment, but I was determined not to let it affect our special night. The confrontation I had been dreading arrived shortly after 8 o'clock. Karen appeared at the shared fence line between our properties, throat clearing loudly to attract attention. Her arms were crossed over her floral blouse, one hand clutching her smartphone like it was connected to her by an invisible umbilical cord. I excused myself from a conversation and approached the fence, maintaining what I hoped was a friendly expression. "Good evening, Karen. Would you like to join us? We have plenty of food and drinks," I offered, gesturing toward the gathering. Karen made no attempt to hide her disdain. "I would like you to turn down your music. Some of us appreciate peace and quiet in our own homes," she said. Her voice carried just enough to turn heads among my closest guests. "I understand. The current volume is within the permitted levels for our neighborhood until 11, but I am happy to turn it down a bit if it is bothering you," I replied, keeping my tone even despite the embarrassment burning in my chest. "Permits?" she scoffed. "Did you actually get permits for this gathering? How many people do you have here? The neighborhood bylaws clearly state that gatherings over 15 people require advance notice to adjacent properties." This was not true. I had reviewed all regulations before planning the party. "We have 16 guests, and the bylaw you are referring to applies to events with 30 or more attendees. But I would have been happy to give you advance notice if you had expressed interest." Karen raised her phone, openly taking photos of our backyard. "We will see what code enforcement has to say about that. And your string lights are very close to being classified as permanent fixtures, which would require HOA approval." Before I could respond, Sarah appeared at my side. She placed a calm hand on my arm, her presence immediately steadying my rising frustration. "Good evening," Sarah said to Karen. "Is there something specific about our gathering that is causing you discomfort? We would like everyone in the neighborhood to feel respected." Karen seemed momentarily taken aback by Sarah's professional demeanor. "The noise is excessive, and there are cars parked all along the street. It is disruptive and potentially blocking emergency vehicle access." I glanced at the street, where 6 cars were parked with ample space between them, all positioned legally and well away from fire hydrants or driveways. Sarah nodded thoughtfully at Karen's concerns. "Thank you for bringing that to our attention. We have instructed all our guests to park legally, but I will double-check to make sure no one is creating an obstruction," Sarah said. Karen seemed disappointed by our reasonable responses. "Well, I have already made some calls. This neighborhood has standards." With that parting comment, she returned to her property, though she did not go inside. Instead, she positioned herself on her back deck, phone in hand, documenting our every move. The encounter cast a pall over the next hour of our celebration. Guests spoke more quietly, glancing occasionally toward Karen's property. Several friends approached to ask about the situation, offering sympathetic stories about their own experiences with difficult neighbors. "Do not worry about her," my friend Michael assured me. "Every neighborhood has one. Last month she reported the Johnsons for their basketball hoop being 6 inches too close to the sidewalk." Sarah squeezed my hand as we watched Karen make what appeared to be another phone call. "Let her call them," she said quietly. "Trust me, it will be fine." I attributed her confidence to exhaustion rather than any real assurance that our evening would continue uninterrupted. When a police cruiser drove slowly past our house without stopping 20 minutes later, I dared to hope that Karen's complaints had been dismissed. That hope was shattered 40 minutes later when not one but 3 police vehicles arrived outside our home, lights flashing but sirens silent. Blue lights painted our backyard in surreal pulses as the police vehicles positioned themselves strategically along the curb. My stomach dropped as conversation throughout the party faltered and died. All eyes turned toward the street, where 3 uniformed officers emerged from their vehicles. Karen descended from her deck and walked purposefully toward them, her stride carrying the confidence of someone who believed justice was about to be served. "I did not expect this many officers," I murmured to Sarah, who stood surprisingly calm beside me. "This seems excessive for a noise complaint." Sarah touched my arm reassuringly. "Let me handle this," she said, but before she could move toward the approaching officers, they had already entered through our side gate, led by Karen with her phone still clutched in her hand. "That is him," Karen announced, pointing toward me as if identifying a criminal in a lineup. "I have documented the disturbance over several hours. The noise violations, the parking issues, and I suspect alcohol permit violations as well." The lead officer, a tall man with a weathered face and the name Rodriguez on his badge, approached us with professional detachment. He carried a clipboard and maintained a neutral expression as he addressed me. "Good evening, sir. We have received multiple complaints about a disturbance at this address. Are you the homeowner?" Officer Rodriguez asked. I nodded, acutely aware of our guests watching the scene unfold. "Yes, officer. We are hosting a small anniversary celebration. We have reviewed all local ordinances and believe we are in compliance, including the noise permit which allows us until 11 p.m. Officer Rodriguez made a note on his clipboard. "I will need to see that permit, sir. We will also need to check sound levels and verify that all vehicles are parked legally. May I ask how many guests are in attendance?" As I reached for my phone to show the digital copy of our permit, Karen interjected triumphantly. "I counted at least 20 people coming in. That exceeds the residential gathering limits without proper event registration." I was about to correct her when Officer Rodriguez's gaze shifted beyond me to where Sarah stood. His professional demeanor underwent a subtle but unmistakable transformation. His posture straightened almost imperceptibly, and recognition flickered across his features. "Captain Rodriguez," Sarah acknowledged with a professional nod. "I was not expecting to see you this evening." The officer cleared his throat. "Captain Lawson, I did not realize this was your residence." He glanced down at his notes, then back at Sarah with new understanding. "We received multiple calls about a potential disturbance." Karen looked between the officer and my wife, confusion replacing her previous smugness. "You know each other." Sarah extended her hand professionally. "Sarah Lawson. I run training programs for the Regional Police Academy. Officer Rodriguez and I have worked together on several community policing initiatives." The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. The 2 other officers exchanged glances, their body language shifting from authoritative to respectful caution. Karen's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and the first hints of concern. "That does not change the fact that there have been violations here tonight," Karen insisted, though her voice had lost some of its previous certainty. Officer Rodriguez maintained his professional demeanor, though the deference in his tone when addressing Sarah was unmistakable. "We will need to conduct a standard investigation to respond to the complaints properly, Captain Lawson. I hope you understand." "Of course," Sarah replied. "We want to make sure everything is handled according to protocol." The second officer, a younger woman with Martinez on her badge, stepped forward. "We should check the sound levels first, sir," she said to Officer Rodriguez, "and verify the permit status." I provided the noise permit information while Officer Martinez set up a decibel meter at our property line. Karen hovered nearby, her phone still recording but her triumphant demeanor noticeably dimmed. Our guests had begun quiet conversations again, though the atmosphere remained tense. The third officer walked the street, checking vehicles and making notes. Officer Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio, his eyes occasionally darting to Sarah with what looked like professional respect mixed with personal concern. "Is there something I can assist with, Officer Rodriguez?" Sarah asked, her tone maintaining the perfect balance between helpful citizen and respected colleague. "Not at all, Captain. We are just following procedure," he replied, emphasis on the word procedure, in a way that seemed meaningful between them. "Though perhaps you could show me the layout of the property while my colleagues complete their assessments." Sarah nodded and guided Officer Rodriguez toward our patio, leaving me with Karen and Officer Martinez. As they walked away, I could not help but notice Karen's expression had transformed completely from righteous indignation to uncertain worry. As Sarah and Officer Rodriguez conversed on the far side of our patio, I provided Officer Martinez with copies of our permits and neighborhood guidelines. The young officer maintained professional courtesy, but I could not help noticing how her eyes kept darting towards Sarah with obvious respect. "Your wife is Captain Lawson," Officer Martinez stated rather than asked as she verified our noise permit. It was not a question, but her tone carried something like awe. "Yes, she is," I confirmed, still processing the situation myself. In our 2 years of marriage, Sarah had always been modest about her role at the academy. She described herself simply as a trainer, never elaborating on her rank or influence. She does not talk much about work at home. Officer Martinez nodded. She developed the de-escalation protocols our entire department uses. I went through her advanced community relations program last year. It is mandatory for everyone in the district now. Karen stood close enough to overhear this exchange, her phone now lowered to her side rather than recording. Her expression had shifted from confident righteousness to growing uncertainty. "The sound levels are well within permitted range, sir," Officer Martinez informed me, showing me the decibel reader displaying numbers well below the threshold. "The music is barely audible from the property line." "That is not possible," Karen interjected. "It was much louder earlier. They must have turned it down when they saw you coming." Officer Martinez turned toward Karen with professional patience. "Ma'am, the current readings are what we can document. Were there specific times when you measured excessive noise levels? Do you have documentation we could review?" Karen fumbled with her phone. "I have recordings, several of them. You can clearly hear their music and people laughing loudly." She played a video that captured distant conversation and background music that sounded remarkably mild even through her recording. Across the yard, Sarah was engaged in what appeared to be a collegial conversation with Officer Rodriguez. I caught fragments about recent training initiatives and policy updates. The third officer had returned from checking vehicles and joined their discussion, his posture reflecting the same deference the others showed to my wife. "I do not understand," Karen said, more to herself than to us. "Why are they not shutting this down? There are clearly violations happening here." Officer Martinez maintained her professional demeanor. "Ma'am, we investigate all complaints thoroughly, but so far we have not documented any violations. The noise levels are within permitted ranges. All vehicles are legally parked with appropriate spacing for emergency access, and the gathering size does not exceed residential limits." While this conversation continued, I noticed Sarah had guided the other officers to the edge of our property. Though I could not hear their words, their body language told a story of professional respect rather than authoritative investigation. At one point, Officer Rodriguez laughed softly at something Sarah said, then quickly composed himself back to professional demeanor. Karen noticed this too. Is she friends with all of you? Is that why you are not enforcing the rules? Officer Martinez's expression remained neutral. Ma'am, we are enforcing all applicable regulations without bias. Captain Lawson's role in the department does not exempt her household from any ordinances, nor would she want it to. The third officer approached us, notepad in hand. All vehicles are properly parked, maintaining appropriate clearance for emergency vehicles, he reported officially. No parking violations observed. Karen crossed her arms tightly across her chest. This is ridiculous. I want to speak to your supervisor. That would be Sergeant Collins, the officer replied. I can provide his contact information. He is currently off duty but returns tomorrow morning. Something in Karen's expression shifted as she processed this name. Collins, David Collins. Yes, ma'am. He was part of Captain Lawson's first training cohort 3 years ago. He speaks very highly of her leadership. The blood drained from Karen's face as she realized the extent of Sarah's connections within the department. I felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort watching this revelation unfold. Sarah had never leveraged her position for personal benefit in the time I had known her, and I could tell from her body language that she was maintaining professional boundaries even now. Officer Rodriguez rejoined our group, his clipboard tucked under his arm. Everything appears to be in order regarding the noise complaint and parking concerns, he announced officially. The gathering is within permitted size limits for residential properties, and all documentation is in order. Karen's frustration boiled over. This is preferential treatment. If this were anyone else's house, you would be shutting it down immediately. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez responded with practiced patience. We respond to all complaints with the same professional standards. There are no violations to address here. However, while we are on site, his gaze drifted beyond Karen to her property. We should ensure all properties in the vicinity are similarly compliant with municipal codes. The implication hung in the air for a moment before Karen fully processed it. When understanding dawned, her indignation gave way to visible alarm. Sarah rejoined us, standing beside me with professional composure, her presence somehow both calming and authoritative. Perhaps we should discuss some concerns about adjacent properties, Officer Rodriguez suggested, his tone remaining strictly professional despite the subtle shift in focus. Would you be available for that conversation, Ms. Williams? Karen's protest died on her lips as Officer Rodriguez and his colleagues directed their attention toward her property. What had begun as her attempt to assert authority over our gathering had transformed into an uncomfortably thorough examination of her own compliance with municipal codes. This is harassment, Karen declared, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. You cannot just inspect my property because I filed a complaint. Officer Rodriguez maintained his professional demeanor. Ma'am, we are conducting visual inspections from public access points only, which is within our authority. We noticed several potential code concerns that warrant documentation while responding to your noise complaint. The three officers positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter of Karen's property. Officer Martinez methodically photographed the drainage system Karen had installed last spring, a system that redirected water from her yard directly onto our property during heavy rains. The third officer measured the height of her fence extension using a laser device, making careful notes on his clipboard. Sarah stood beside me, watching the proceedings with composed neutrality. Though she had not directly initiated this inspection, I suspected her quiet conversation with Officer Rodriguez had brought certain issues to his attention. "They would be doing this regardless of who lived here," Sarah said quietly, seeming to read my thoughts. "But they might not have noticed the violations if Karen had not brought them here tonight." Our guests had gradually resumed their conversations, though many watched the unfolding scene with poorly concealed interest. Karen paced along her property line, phone pressed to her ear as she apparently sought intervention from some higher authority. "The fence extension exceeds maximum height by 18 inches, the third officer announced, loud enough for Karen to hear. "And it appears to have been installed without proper permits based on city records." Karen ended her call, frustration evident in her rigid posture. "That fence has been that way for years. No one has ever complained about it." "Code enforcement is not complaint-driven, ma'am," Officer Martinez explained. "When violations are observed by officers in the field, we are obligated to document them regardless of prior complaints." The inspection continued methodically. Officer Rodriguez examined the large garden shed positioned near our shared property line, consulting building code references on his tablet. "This permanent structure appears to be located within the required setback zone. Our records do not show permits for a structure of this size in this location." Each finding was documented with photographs and measurements. Karen's initial outrage had transformed into growing concern as the list of potential violations mounted. The security lights she had installed that shone directly into our bedroom window were noted for exceeding brightness ordinances. The improper drainage system was photographed from multiple angles. The unpermitted shed extension was measured precisely. Throughout the inspection, Sarah maintained a professional distance, never directly involving herself in the officer's work. Yet there was no mistaking the subtle nods exchanged between her and Officer Rodriguez when particularly significant issues were identified. Neighbors from adjacent properties had emerged onto porches and driveways, watching the proceedings with unconcealed interest. Many had experienced their own conflicts with Karen over the years, and the sight of her receiving such thorough scrutiny carried an unmistakable aura of cosmic justice. "These are all minor technical issues that everyone in the neighborhood has," Karen protested, her voice higher than normal as the documentation continued. "You are targeting me because I complained about their party." Officer Rodriguez looked up from his tablet. "Ma'am, we are applying the same standards to your property that would apply to any residents in this jurisdiction. These are not minor issues. Improper drainage systems can cause significant property damage to neighboring homes. Unpermitted structures pose safety risks, and light pollution from non-compliant fixtures impacts quality of life for adjacent residents." Karen turned toward Sarah, frustration overcoming her caution. "This is your doing. You are using your position to intimidate me." Sarah's expression remained professional and composed. "Ms. Williams, I have not directed these officers to take any specific actions regarding your property. They are conducting their duties according to department protocols. If you have concerns about their professional conduct, there are appropriate channels for filing complaints." Officer Martinez completed her inspection of the drainage system and approached with her findings. "The current configuration appears to violate Municipal Code Section 4.7 regarding water runoff management. During our last significant rainfall, did you observe any flooding issues?" she asked me directly. Our yard experienced substantial pooling where her drainage pipe directs water onto our property, I confirmed, recalling the minor flooding we had dealt with during spring storms. We have documentation of the damage if that would be helpful. Karen's face paled further as she realized how thoroughly the tables had turned. What had begun as her complaint about our celebration had evolved into a comprehensive documentation of her own code violations. The officers continued their work with methodical precision, each finding adding to the growing list of issues requiring correction. As the inspection of Karen's property continued, a remarkable transformation occurred in the neighborhood dynamics. What had begun as an embarrassing interruption to our anniversary celebration had become an unexpected community spectacle. Neighbors who had been subject to Karen's complaints over the years emerged from their homes, watching with poorly disguised satisfaction as she received the same meticulous scrutiny she had demanded for others. The officers maintained absolute professionalism throughout their work. There were no smirks or unprofessional comments, only the methodical documentation of each violation with reference to specific municipal codes. This made the process all the more powerful. It was not personal retribution, but the impartial application of the very rules Karen had weaponized against others. "Ms. Williams," Officer Rodriguez said, clipboard in hand, "based on our preliminary assessment, we have documented 7 potential code violations that will require correction. We are issuing notices today rather than immediate citations, which gives you 30 days to address these issues before formal enforcement actions begin." Karen received the paperwork with trembling hands. "This is going to cost thousands of dollars to fix. That shed would need to be completely rebuilt. The drainage system would require professional reinstallation. The expense of compliance does not negate the requirement to follow established codes," Officer Martinez explained with professional detachment. "These regulations exist for community safety and property protection." I felt a momentary pang of sympathy watching Karen's distress, despite the years of harassment she had inflicted on us and other neighbors. Sarah must have sensed my conflicted feelings because she squeezed my hand gently. "This is not about punishment," she whispered. "It is about establishing boundaries and protecting community standards, the same ones she claimed to care about." Karen made one final attempt to redirect attention. "What about their party? Are you just going to ignore the disruption they have caused tonight?" Officer Rodriguez consulted his notes. "As documented earlier, we found no violations regarding noise levels, gathering size, or parking arrangements. Their event is in compliance with all applicable regulations and permitted to continue until 11 p.m. per their approved noise allowance." Karen's shoulders slumped in defeat. The documentation clutched in her hand represented weeks of expensive corrections and the undeniable loss of her self-appointed authority in the neighborhood. Our eyes met briefly across the property line, and I was surprised to see not anger but something closer to embarrassment in her gaze. The officers completed their formal documentation and prepared to depart. Officer Rodriguez approached Sarah and me with professional courtesy. "Thank you for your cooperation this evening. Your gathering may continue as permitted. If you have any further concerns, please do not hesitate to contact the department." Though his words were standard procedure, the respect in his tone when addressing Sarah was unmistakable. The other officers nodded politely as they returned to their vehicles. No special treatment had been offered or requested, yet the outcome had delivered a form of justice more effective than any confrontation could have achieved. As the police cruisers pulled away, our party guests gathered around us with a mixture of amazement and supportive comments. Neighbors who had witnessed the scene approached to share their own stories of Karen's previous complaints and harassments. What had begun as an anniversary celebration had transformed into something like a community bonding event, united by the shared experience of finally seeing accountability applied evenly. Karen retreated into her home, documentation in hand, porch light extinguished as if to signal her withdrawal from the evening's events. For the first time since we had moved into the neighborhood, we continued our gathering without the sensation of being monitored and judged from across the fence line. "I never mentioned any of those issues to the officers," Sarah said quietly as we watched Karen's house go dark. "They simply observed what was already there." "You did not need to," I replied. "The system worked exactly as it should. The rules applied equally to everyone." Our anniversary party continued with renewed energy after the officers departed. The tension that had hung over the gathering dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief, and if I am honest, collective satisfaction at the evening's unexpected turn of events. As guests began to depart around 10:30, many expressed that this would be an anniversary celebration we would never forget. "I have lived next to Karen for 5 years," our neighbor Tom confided as he and his wife prepared to leave. "In all that time, I have never seen her receive a single consequence for her behavior. Tonight was like watching karma unfold in real time." In the days that followed, the neighborhood underwent a subtle but significant transformation. Karen's property became a hub of activity as contractors arrived to assess the work needed to bring her home into compliance. The oversized shed was partially dismantled and rebuilt to proper specifications. The drainage system was redirected to appropriate channels rather than neighboring properties. The security lights were replaced with properly shielded fixtures that no longer blazed into our bedroom windows. More remarkable than these physical changes was Karen's behavioral transformation. The constant surveillance from her windows ceased. The stream of complaints to the HOA board about minor infractions throughout the neighborhood dwindled to nothing. When we passed on the street, she offered stiff but civil nods rather than the previous glares and muttered comments. One evening about 3 weeks after our anniversary party, Sarah and I sat on our back patio enjoying the peaceful sunset. The sound of movement from Karen's yard caught our attention. She was in her garden, pruning roses without glancing in our direction. "Do you think she learned anything from all this?" I asked Sarah. Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. People rarely change completely, but sometimes they find a better balance. She needed boundaries, and now she has them. "You never told me you were so influential in the department," I said, a question implicit in my observation. Sarah smiled. "It is not about influence. It is about earning respect through consistent work and fair treatment. I never wanted special treatment because of my position, which is why I rarely discuss it." "But you must have known how things would unfold when the officers recognized you," I suggested. "I knew they would be professional and follow procedure," Sarah replied. "Which is exactly what happened. Karen learned that the system works both ways. It protects everyone equally when applied correctly." The following weekend, something unprecedented occurred. As I mowed our lawn, Karen approached the fence line, a strained but determined expression on her face. "I wanted to apologize for disrupting your celebration," she said formally. The words seemed difficult for her but genuine nonetheless. "It was inappropriate of me." I turned off the lawnmower, surprised by this unexpected olive branch. "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that." She nodded stiffly. "The contractors finished the drainage corrections yesterday. Your yard should not experience flooding during the next rainfall." With that brief exchange, she returned to her home. It was not friendship, but it was a start towards civilized coexistence, something I had not thought possible a month earlier. That evening, I recounted the interaction to Sarah. She listened with interest but without surprise. "Most people do not want conflict," she observed. "They want to feel secure and respected. Sometimes it takes a realignment of understanding to achieve that balance." In the months that followed, our neighborhood settled into a new equilibrium. Karen remained reserved but no longer hostile. Other neighbors reported similar improvements in their interactions with her. The vigilant patrolling and documentation of minor infractions ceased entirely. As for Sarah and me, we hosted several more gatherings that summer, all without incident or interruption. The story of our anniversary party became neighborhood legend, shared with newcomers as both warning and reassurance that in our community, the rules truly applied to everyone equally. Sometimes justice arrives not through confrontation, but through the quiet, impartial application of the very standards someone has demanded for others. And in our case, it arrived in 3 police cruisers, summoned by the very person who would learn its most valuable lesson.